The night was cold, but the tension in the air was even colder. Big Shaq, the viral rap sensation known for his hit asterisk man's not hot asterisk, was just minding his business, walking down the street after a late-night studio session. But then, out of nowhere, flashing red and blue lights lit up the road behind him. A cop car screeched to a stop. "Hey, you! Hands where I can see 'em!" barked the officer as he stepped out, his face tight with hostility. Shaq had done nothing wrong. No reason to be stopped. No reason to be treated like a suspect. But this officer wasn't interested in fairness. What happened next? Well, let's just say karma has a way of working fast. Because just 4 minutes later, the same cop who thought he was untouchable would find himself in a situation he never saw coming. Big Shaq froze for a second, his mind racing. He had nothing to hide, but he knew how these situations could go. He slowly raised his hands, his breath visible in the cold air. "What's the problem, officer?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. The cop took a step closer, eyes full of something more than just authority. There was something personal in his stare, something hostile. "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for," he said, hand resting on his holster. Shaq let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "A suspect? Bruv, I just came from the studio." The officer wasn't listening. He was sizing Shaq up, looking for an excuse, a reason to escalate things. A few people across the street slowed down, watching. The air felt heavier. Shaq could feel it. Something wasn't right. And in just a few minutes, everything was about to change. Shaq could feel the officer's stare digging into him, his grip on the situation slipping. This wasn't just a routine stop. It was something else. But before he could speak again, the cop reached for his radio. "Got a tall male, dark hoodie, possible match. Stand by." Shaq shook his head. "Bruv, I'm not who you're looking for." His voice was steady, but his heart was pounding. He had seen stories like this before, and they never ended well. Across the street, a woman pulled out her phone, recording. A couple of guys from the block slowed their steps, whispering. The energy was shifting, but the officer didn't seem to notice. His focus was locked on Shaq, as if proving a point. Then, without warning, the cop took a step closer, his hand twitching near his belt. Shaq tensed. Something was about to go down. And this time, the tables might just turn. The street felt frozen in time. Shaq could hear the faint hum of traffic in the distance, the low murmur of people watching, but his focus was locked on the officer in front of him. The cop's hand hovered near his belt, his fingers twitching like he was ready to make a move. Shaq held his breath. One wrong step, one sudden motion, and this could spiral out of control. "Turn around." Now the officer ordered, his voice sharp. Shaq didn't move. He wasn't about to make himself look guilty when he had done nothing wrong. "For what?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The officer's jaw tightened. The tension was suffocating. The small crowd had grown, phones out, eyes locked on the scene. A few whispers floated in the air. And then, out of nowhere, a loud voice cut through the standoff. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Heads turned. The cop stiffened. And in that moment, everything shifted. The officer turned sharply toward the voice, his stance stiffening. A tall man in a suit stepped forward from the crowd, his face set with authority. The moment he spoke again, the energy shifted. "I said, what do you think you're doing?" The man's tone was calm but commanding. The cop hesitated. He clearly wasn't expecting to be questioned. "This is police business," he snapped. The man didn't flinch. "Funny, because I am the police." He pulled out a badge, flashing it just long enough for people to see. "Internal affairs." A murmur spread through the crowd. Shaq blinked, his pulse still racing. This wasn't just some random bystander. The officer's face went pale, but he kept his stance. "I don't see how this concerns you." "Oh, it concerns me," the man said, stepping closer, "because I've been watching you, and I know exactly what you've been up to." The street fell dead silent. And then, just like that, everything took a turn no one expected. The officer's jaw tightened, his confidence cracking. The internal affairs agent held his gaze, his presence alone shifting the entire dynamic. "You've been reported multiple times," the agent continued, his voice sharp. "And now, here you are again, harassing someone for no reason." The crowd stirred. Whispers turned to quiet murmurs. The cop's hand twitched near his belt, but now it wasn't out of authority. It was uncertainty. He glanced at Shaq, then back at the agent. Shaq exhaled slowly. "So what now?" he asked, his voice steady. The agent didn't break eye contact with the cop. "Now, you hand over your badge." The officer flinched, but before he could argue, the agent reached for his radio. "We need a unit here. Now." The cop swallowed hard. He knew it was over. His hands curled into fists, but he had no choice. With the whole street watching, he reached down and unclipped his badge. Shaq watched in silence. Justice had come full circle. But just as he turned to leave, the agent called after him. "Hey, Big Shaq." Shaq turned, raising a brow. The agent smirked. "Man's still not hot." Shaq chuckled. The night had taken a wild turn, but one thing was certain: karma always has perfect timing. Shaq couldn't help but grin. After everything that had just happened, the moment almost felt unreal. The crowd slowly began to disperse, shaking their heads, some still recording, others whispering about how fast things had flipped. The officer, now stripped of his badge, stood frozen, his face drained of color. He had walked into this situation thinking he was in control, but karma had other plans. The internal affairs agent gave Shaq a nod before turning back to handle business. Shaq adjusted his hoodie, taking a deep breath. He had dealt with moments like this before, too many times, but this time things had ended differently. As he walked away, his phone buzzed. A message from his boys at the studio. "Asterisk where you at? Bro asterisk." Shaq smirked, typing back. "Asterisk man's not hot, but man's got a story to tell asterisk." And with that, he disappeared into the city, leaving the past behind.